So thank you for joining me today, Tasha.
Yeah,
It's been great. You're out in the wilds of Washington or of Montana, and I'm in the wilds of Washington. Um, so you've done a lot of interviews, of course, over the past week and things like that. But I wanted to sort of go through the whole history of the Oath Keepers, since you saw it from the inside out. And of course, part of this history, you were sympathetic.
Mhm.
And so what I think would be good to talk about is, the process that by which you became de-radicalized
Yeah.
and sort of woke up, because I think that's important to a lot of people, because I think that's sort of our dilemma now. We've had so many people. I was reading a piece about a woman in Idaho whose infant is dying of COVID, or is in the ICU with COVID, intubated. And it just made me angry, because this is just an ordinary working class person who gets misled by all of these conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
And I think that it creates real victims out there.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to make fun of these folks, but I have a lot of compassion for them, because I know how easy it is for ordinary people to get sucked into this. And you were an ordinary Westerner all the time you were growing up. Is that right? Can you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up Mormon in the West, in Nevada,
In Las Vegas, or?
in Las Vegas. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I had sort of a mixed political upbringing, because my parents were secretly Democrats. And, my mom, during the Equal Rights Amendment, my mom went on strike in the House and marched around with a bottle of Air laundry detergent chanting ERA. And so they were very quiet about their beliefs in the church, with the church. But there are some Mormon Democrats, but we learned to sort of adapt and agree to disagree. And my mom
Right.
knew not to keep her mouth shut about pro-choice, because she was very pro-choice, even though she was Mormon. And there was a lot of things they didn't agree with. They always voted Democrat. And so, I was pretty open to a lot of different political views, which is what led me probably to becoming a libertarian, is it just seemed to be pretty accepting of all sides. Although I was, a lot of people use the word libertarian, but they actually mean, they're much more right-leaning than I think than I was. I think I was always very pro open borders, very like really open borders was a huge issue for me. I very emotionally attached to the idea of America as this welcoming melting pot, like a safe haven, and it's a that's a real emotional hot button for me, and that was really important to me, and always been pro-choice, and and then all the other fun stuff with libertarianism, pro drugs, pro prostitution, pro guns, pro everything.
Right. Well, I grew up in a Mormon community as well in southern Idaho, and in fact, half of my family is LDS, although they're Jack Mormons.
Yeah.
But though I was raised Methodist, but something like 70% of my graduating class was LDS. And one of the things about growing up in southeastern Idaho at that time in the 60s was that the John Birch Society had a tremendous influence on the church. I would go to my friends' houses and get handed a copy of The Naked Communist, or None Dare Call It Conspiracy, right? And so I was familiar with John Birch Society beliefs very early on. But was this also, I mean, it sounds like your parents were not in the Bircher mold, but you must have seen that influence floating around.
Probably some, but my parents very much stayed out of a lot of the politics, just because they almost just didn't want it brought up, because they kind of didn't want to be outed. And my parents worked very hard. They had a window manufacturing business, and they're very involved in that type of thing. when they did get involved in politics, it was very local. My dad was involved in zoning issues and county
Yeah,
commission
yeah,
meetings and stuff like that, not wanting the neighborhood to turn into warehouses and stuff like that. So that's, I was always pro-gun. We always had, I never saw any guns in the house. I knew my dad had one. Never even saw it really. My brothers would, go shooting, but I would never see it. It's just not really part of our lifestyle. We did prep.
right,
We did have a basement full of preps, but again, it wasn't a lifestyle. It wasn't an identity like I saw
right,
later. It was
right.
just, one less trip to the grocery store. It was just something they bought over a couple of weeks, stuck it in the basement, put it on shelves, and then, it's there if you run out of something, and never thought about it and really never talked about it, unlike
The
what I later,
preppers.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And effectively, the preps were never as good as anything my parents had as far as usefulness. It was just the talk and the constant procuring of, oh, this prep and that prep, and got to have this, you got to have that. And
Right.
none of it was
And
really very useful.
yeah, no, most of those K rations are pretty inedible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to quite a few preparedness expos and that sort of thing, and yeah, it's pretty amazing what people were sticking in their basements, especially
Yeah.
around 99, the
Oh my
Y2K,
gosh.
the
Yeah.
Y2K thing.
Stuart was all in for Y2K for sure.
And so I'm curious, because we saw after that whole fiasco, we saw a lot of people peel away from the patriot
Mhm,
movement because they felt that they had been snookered.
mhm.
But that wasn't where Stewart went.
No, no. There was definitely the moment the lights did not go out, there was without a doubt a palpable disappointment, I think, that I really picked up on of, oh, I don't get to be, king of the world. I mean, I think
Right,
it's the simplicity of that life is what a lot of these guys long for. They want that to happen, and it was about to be it. It was about to be the moment that all the things in life that they fail at disappears. The fact that his credit's ruined, and the student loans, or all that disappears,
right,
and then they're just big men in the apocalypse. And so I think it was definitely, I think for Stewart in particular, it was definitely a disappointment. I could feel it. And even though, it's a good thing it didn't happen. And then immediate regrouping, and people slapping each other on the back saying, well, that was a good practice run for when it really does happen. And
ah,
just no,
of course, of
no,
course.
yeah, no amount of, well, I'll be careful what I read next time, or no amount of, none of it. It was just,
Yeah, no, no, there wasn't any consideration that
no sense of shame or
that they
whoops.
had been wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, is rather, oh, it was just,
no
we're getting
chagrin.
ready. Yeah. So we did get a little bit ahead there. You met Stewart when you were 17, correct?
18,
Or
came in
18.
for dance lessons. I was a dance
Yeah.
instructor at
Right.
Arthur Murray's. Came in for ballroom dance lessons. We met, we dated, and you grew up around Mormon, so when, in church culture, Mormon church culture, you date a lot because it's not serious.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot of like, oh, let's go bowling, or so I thought, oh, we'll just date, and so we dated a little bit and did get more serious. And then 3 months into dating is when he had his eye accident. Shot himself in the eye.
What was he doing?
Um, well, I have a theory. I have a story that he gave, and I have a theory that I've put together over about 20 years, and I think I know what happened. It's pure conjecture. The story is that he was with a friend of his. Even according to his story, this friend was a convicted crack dealer. It's somebody he went to high school with. He said he had some problems, but he's doing better now, and he lives in a bad part of town, and he needs some protection, which I didn't know anything about this. I was told after the fact. His mother had some kind of swap meet style jewelry store years prior, and a customer who has since died traded a little 22 Derringer for some jewelry. So this is a firearm that's nowhere near registered to Stewart or his mother or anyone else who's had it for the last 3 owners, right? It's a Derringer. It's been in her drawer. She gave it to Stewart, and Stewart said, well, you can have this little Derringer. This is already in line one. It's already an illegal transaction. This guy's a felon. He's bringing him. So this is the first thing that's wrong with the story. Stewart's admitting to a crime in the opening line, openly admitting that. Then they stopped for drinks at a soda machine. And this is downtown Las Vegas on what back then was Industrial Road, which is warehouses, shut down garages, you know, old town Las Vegas, so one of the worst areas of town. And they stopped there to get drinks from a soda machine, which I drove by a week later and it was closed down and there was no power to the soda machine. And they got out of the car to get a soda. He drops the gun. He hears something drop. He looks down and it shoots. That's also a lie. Obviously, that timeline's off, right? You hear it and you look down and then it shoots. It doesn't make sense. But he told the same story over and over and over again. He never varied in details. When roosters are crowing, he never varied the details of that story, and he never added anything to it. And there was never a time you could go down a different road to that story. Like, well, let's just explore. You know, over 20 years, you think so, at some point you'd be like, well, why did he want that gun, or why didn't you give him this, or you know, why were you carrying it if you'd given it to him, and why are you driving together? You know, all these things didn't make sense. But anyway, he shot himself. He dropped it, shot him in the eye. It's a
It was a
22, so it rattled
Derringer.
around. Derringer. It rattled around, shot him in the eye, destroyed his eyeball, came out, and the bullet was sitting. This is 1991, sitting in his skin, just under the skin, and they pulled it right out in surgery, removed his eye. So that's the story. For me, it changed everything because I was already about 3 months into this relationship, already, even at 18, almost 19 at that point, thinking this person's pretty controlling. You know, he's telling me what to wear. He's you know, so this is going on and I'm thinking maybe I need to break up with this person, you know, but then this thing happens and it's this huge event and, you know, within days, his family is giving my family updates, and I'm staying at his mother's house, who I'd only met like twice, and learning to take care of his empty eye socket. And, you know, it's I'm just completely run over by his family. I mean, I'm just absorbed basically. And I
Right.
just, you know, and if I had been a little older, if I had been a little, I mean, if I had been like 23, 24, I probably would have been like, okay, you know, you're home from the hospital. This is unfortunate timing. This is terrible that you've had this tragedy when I'm about to break up with you, but that's how that goes. But at 18, I just thought, well, I'm totally obligated now. I have no choice. And I just thought, well, I just make the best of it. I just make the best of it, you know. And if he's got problems, I'll fix them. And that was sort of that. And then that started the relationship. And I encouraged him. I thought I was going to help him by, you know, I'll encourage him to do better. I'll encourage him to
Yeah.
be a better person. He'd never been to college. He didn't do well in school. His mother moved constantly. He'd gone to 6 high schools, I think, just around Las Vegas and California, just constantly moving, constantly here and there.
And he had been in the Army, correct?
Yes. He had been a paratrooper in the Army. He was injured in a parachuting accident. He fell 70 feet and broke his back. But he really only served a year and a half or so, you know, and then he was officially separated, I think a total of 4 years, but, you know, he was out and, you know, parking cars for a living for 2 years because of his
Gotcha.
injury. So that was before I met him. He was 25 when I met him.
And a
So-
good-looking guy then.
What's up?
Stu was a pretty good-looking young man too.
Yeah, he was. He was, you know, he was in good shape, and, you know, and he seemed friendly, and there were some things about him that were a little off.
Controlling.
Controlling, not very social, not really good at hanging out with friends, but would always want to control the event. You know, he would always be the
Right.
leader. If he was the leader, he's fine. It would seem like he was being social, but he really was never interacting in a peer type of way. He never had guy friends. He could not handle any type of guy banter or any kind of like razzing or, you know, anybody making fun of him at all. He would get very, very angry very quickly if anyone
Right.
even just kind of joked with him at all. So I noticed that. I mean, one of the things that attracted me is that he was very intelligent. And I thought, well, I can work with this, you know. And then he was assertive because I was so shy, you know, that, and I thought, well, the good parts about Stewart is that I will have this life of adventure. You
Right.
know, he was showing me pictures of himself hang gliding and said he would be willing to go skydiving, and he wanted to learn to sail. And I thought, well, these are all things I would love to be able to learn to do. I just, you know, I'm not afraid of skydiving, but I'm afraid of going into the skydiving office and setting up lessons. You know, I don't want to talk to the
Right.
person, you know. So I thought this is my road to get past the shyness. So I encouraged him to go to school. Um, I was going to school. Um,
At UNLV.
mhm,
Yeah.
UNLV. And then I almost don't even know when I quit going. And I had a college fund that he wound up using for his own car. He borrowed to buy a car that he was going to pay back so that I could start the next semester, and then he never did. And that was huge. It wasn't just the money. It created a really isolating situation for me where I did not want to be around my family. I didn't want my family to ask me questions about why I don't have college money anymore. That was supposed to be for college, set aside for that. And now I've loaned it under so much pressure to my stupid boyfriend, you know, and he never paid it back. And now I'm kind of stuck. You know, I kind of like, well, I gotta marry my money back eventually, you know.
Right.
And so I started, you know, just putting him through school, and he started doing really well. And then he kind of sat me down and said, you know, I never had a chance to do this. My mother didn't support me doing these things. If you support me doing these things, I will do really well in school, but I can't work in order to do this. If I'm going to go beyond this, you know, I need to completely immerse myself into everything.
Every college student's ideal. Have a sugar mama.
That's true. So I thought, well, this poor man, you know, this poor man, his mother didn't take care of him. I guess somebody, you know, someone else, and I felt guilty because I thought, well, I had such a great upbringing. You know, we grew up in a Mormon culture. My dad ran things sort of, but he was also a very nice guy, so it didn't really matter. You
Right.
know, so he was much older. He was much older than my mom, and my mom was kind of old to even have me. My dad was a World War II veteran,
Gotcha.
so you know, it was and he was raised in the Ozarks and in Arkansas, so it was like being raised in the 1940s. You know what I mean? I grew up in a different time. So
Right.
these kind of gender roles didn't, you know, that kind of man in control of things, that just came totally natural to me. But I never saw the bad side of that because my dad was just a jovial guy, you know.
Yeah.
So that part I fell right into and didn't question it at all, that
Yeah.
Stewart was in charge of everything. And you know, we got married. Um, I started stripping for a living because he just pushed me and pushed me and pushed me into it to be able
Yeah,
to pay for everything.
it sounded from the Los Angeles Times interview like he realized that you could make more money by
Yeah,
stripping than by doing, you know, mainstream
yeah.
dance stuff. So it was all about the money for
It
Stu.
was all about the money, and that was really horrible. Yeah, that really showed his true colors. We got married soon after that, you know. But in some ways, he showed his true colors in some ways because he would pick me up at 6 o'clock in the morning from work and never, you know, how was your night? And just how much did you make? You know, and really pressure me to make more and more money, which you
Ah,
can make anywhere from $100 a night, or in a bad night, $50 a night,
yeah, yeah,
or you know, you can make $1,000 a night, and it depends on what you're doing. If you show up and dance, you're making $150 a night, like a cocktail waitress, you know.
so
So
part
it's
of
like,
this that just what you've been telling me so far, this there's one thing that's really off here is that, I mean, you were a painfully shy person, so this must have
yeah.
been excruciating to be stripping in front of men.
It was very difficult. I mean, and in some ways, other ways, I had been a performer, so I
Right.
sort of, you know, I fell into that role. It was a
You
little hard for me. I was okay with the performance side, you know, the main stage. It was the interacting that was really difficult. And there were times where I would just, you know, on the way to work, we just have to pull over so I could throw up because I just hated it so much,
right.
you know. But then there was the other side. It was a really glamorous nightclub. So it was full of celebrities. You know, I can't count the number of celebrities that would, you know, interact with every night, you know. And and so I almost kind of forgot about Stewart. I mean, I was making my money. He was a jerk when I saw him, but I was in my own world,
Right.
and I'm, talking with, every B-list celebrity there is, and hanging out with Dennis Rodman and Pamela Anderson and, all night and drinking and coming home at 7 in the morning. And he's a jerk, but I don't care. I was working so many hours,
Right.
and he's also dependent on me to pay the bills. So
That's right. So
he was, yeah,
he could only be a jerk so far.
yeah, there were limits. So I didn't really see how bad it was. And I thought, well, he knew what I was trying to do. He clearly saw through me. He knew I thought I could fix him. He knew he didn't see himself as broken. And he sort of played into that, where he would constantly say things like, oh, I really feel like I'm, I'm changing as a person here. And that I'm, I look at past videos of birthday parties and stuff, and I can see how I used to be a real jerk, but I feel so differently about things now, and the way that I could change and grow is to just fulfill my purpose in life. He always talked about fulfilling his purpose, which I always took great offense at, because I thought, well, what the heck is my purpose? What's my purpose? This isn't my purpose. I'm not fulfilling my purpose. I'm, I'm just doing a thing. I'm just paying the bills, but I guess it's all about his purpose. And it always was. And he was
Right.
convinced that he had almost died, from spinal meningitis. He'd almost died from, breaking his back, and then he shot himself in the head. And he was saved for something great. And he was really propelled by that idea that he was going to achieve greatness in some way. And that God, even though he wasn't religious, or some higher power, felt that he was special and meant for something monumental. And
Destiny.
destiny. And he would get what he called restless. So every time he's acting controlling or violent or throwing things around, this is his restlessness.
Yeah.
Because he's not fulfilling his purpose, because I'm not helping him enough, and I'm not being supportive enough.
Of
And so
course.
that was the pattern.
This is all very abusive, very controlling.
Yeah, so really, really standard at that point, kind of abusive pattern.
Was he physically abusive as well as verbally?
He became so later. It's like he would have to have deniability about being abusive. So it would always have to be an accident, or, oh, I just lost my temper for a second. Whoa, that was crazy. That just my mother just taking over for a minute there. You would always have to have some deniability. And then I never knew if it was gaslighting, or if he was just lying to himself, or if he actually believed his own lies. But sometimes he would do something like throw something at you, or, break the windshield on the car while you're driving. And he would act like it never happened. I mean, he would just say, well, that didn't happen. No, I was reaching over here and the windshield broke. And he would say something like that, maybe like 30 seconds later. And I never really knew if he believed it, if he was just kind of kooky, or if he just thought he could convince his audience, even if it was just one person, that it just never happened. It was really strange. And that's something he always did.
Gaslighting.
Yeah. I've never hit any of the kids. I've never harmed you. I've never been abusive. And he would say that, 30 seconds after, acting like that. So it was really weird. And you'd have to agree with him or it would start all over again, So he did throw himself into UNLV. I helped a lot. I did 2 of his classes for him. He had 2 honors classes. I did both of those for him. In order to graduate summa cum laude, he had to take 2 extra classes. One was French history, and one was Spanish history. And I did all the work for both of those for him, including his papers, because he said he was, he's doing important things. And if he couldn't get through it, and he didn't graduate summa cum laude, he would never get into law school. And if he couldn't get into law school, he couldn't support the family. And this would all be my fault. And so, and by the way, the paper's due tomorrow, and I don't have time to do it. So you got to do it. And so he did graduate. I think he had a 3.9. He graduated summa cum laude. He was president of the Poli Sci Honor Society. He was in the National Honor Society. He was, vice president of, his fraternity. He was very, very, very active. He interned at the DA's office. He did everything. Did a paper. And after that, he decided he also needed to do an internship. if he was going to get into a good law school, because he always said he was going to go to Yale. He applied everywhere locally and got nowhere. And I think it's because of his mannerisms and his manner, and he's so gruff and he's very disagreeable. But he wrote a very long, lengthy, poetic sounding letter to Ron Paul in DC, and Ron Paul hired him as the mail guy. And we were there for about a year. We left abruptly after I had my second baby. And I had quit serving at some time in school when I got pregnant, when he was in school. And we moved in with my mother's house before that. Moved in with my mom and lived off his VA money, basically, because he still didn't work. And I worked for a little bit for his mother, but she never paid me. So um, so then we moved to DC, worked for Ron Paul, and then we just moved. I had my second baby. 3 weeks later, we said, we're moving back into your mom's house across country from DC back to Vegas. And I never really found out why. I figured he was probably fired because he really didn't have a great work ethic. And so we moved back to Vegas. And then he spent that year, getting ready for law school. He worked as an artist.
Oh, he had been accepted by then?
No, he just was like applying. And
oh, I see.
During that time, he worked as an artist. He had been a professional artist multiple times. Did amazing, of course. It's really annoying. Really beautiful. He couldn't believe someone could create stuff like that and be such an awful person. So he worked again as an artist in Las Vegas. And then he applied everywhere. He got in everywhere. He got in everywhere he applied. He got into Harvard. He got into Columbia. He got waitlisted at Stanford, but they would have let him in if he'd have given them. He's got in everywhere. And he chose Yale. And Yale's kind of a blur to me, really. But people didn't like him because he was so argumentative in class. He would say to me that the teachers would often do their thing, and then they'd say, all right, Mr. Rhodes, have your say. So he was obviously really argumentative in class. But, this is during the Bush administration. So
right.
Most of his ideas were pretty well received. And he wrote a paper that was, celebrated. He won a prize for it. It was considered the best paper on the Bill of Rights. They gave him like thousands of dollars for writing this paper as a prize. It was on enemy combatant status, which was a big deal at the time. This is 2004, right? And I'm thinking back on that now. I realize, of course, what I didn't realize then was he's writing about enemy combatant status, but what he's really writing about is why he does not ever want to be declared an enemy combatant. He wants to stay in court. And so I think he was, looking at that paper, it's very well done. But I think he's writing it about himself. I think he was already, this is what he's been wanting to do since the beginning. Yeah. I really do, looking at that paper. But nobody saw anything weird about it because it's during Bush. So it's just like,
I would typify, so my first exposure, as I mentioned, to Stu was in 2009, when he was first founding the Oath Keepers. And it struck me then that the political ideology that he was espousing was fundamentally Bircherite. It was this conspiracist worldview. And it sounds like Stu had already bought into this back at Y2K. Had he had these beliefs even when you first met him, or was this something that sort of gained ground over time? He was that way all along.
He was naturally what I would call very fearful, which I saw as a symptom of some of his, his abuse growing up. And even when I would see it in the politics, I would think, that's a side of it, because what you see in sort of the macro now was very small then, but it was in little ways the same beliefs. Like, he would check the oil in the car in a parking lot, and he would lose his mind if I sat in the car while he did that, because I would need to get out of the car and watch his back, because while he's checking the oil in the car, a person could walk up and slam the hood on his head. So that kind of fear, constantly worried about someone breaking in, um, keep so many feet between this car and that car in case you're carjacked, and who's that guy and what's he up to, and stay back, and just this constant self-protection, and constant fear and constant paranoia. Even when he was a valet parker who was a member of the NRA, he thought that maybe he was on some government list because he had joined the NRA. So, and I remember just thinking, that's that kind of paranoia. That's maybe it is from child abuse, but that's what I thought at the time. I was like, well, I'll fix that.
We can always fix them, can't
I'll
we?
fix that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had, I still considered myself a libertarian. So, after law school, he interned again, Arizona State Supreme Court for Justice Ryan. And then from there, he then went to work at a law firm in Polson, Montana, which is always moving. Because every time you get behind, he's really lazy, and he'd get behind in his work and things would get due, and he would always blame emergencies. Oh, this happened and that happened, and my mother has cancer, and my wife had a miscarriage. Sometimes I hadn't even had a miscarriage. He would just say I did. We would get behind. This is why I won't get caught up. Well, that will buy you so much time. You can do like one brilliant project, and the boss is, this is great, but then you can't keep it up, and then you get behind. Oh, then you just move. And so that's what he did. So every year, it's time to move, and he would just make up an emergency. So we moved to Montana. So this is where we're going to be forever. Oh, good enough. I don't care. I'm just tired of moving because I grew up in one house my whole life.
Right.
My parents were still living there, and here I never moved in my entire life, and it was just every year, just constant moving cross country with at this point. I'm pregnant with my fourth kid, and we're in Montana, and the someday is supposed to come now. He is a graduate of Yale Law School. The day that I think in the LA Times I said something like, we had an agreement. You can do all these crazy things you want to do, but I want to be permanent somewhere with a home in a damn treehouse in the backyard.
For the kids.
By the time the kids, before he's too old, the oldest kid's too old to play in it. That's what I want out of this. That's all I want. You can do all the fancy schmancy stuff you want. You can drag me around, and we can live on, ramen noodles year after year in a beat up car. And, but at some point before the kid's like 8 or 9 years old, the oldest one, I want to be permanent. And that was what was promised. But then it was time to move again. About a year and a half into that law firm in Montana, he said, well, now we have to go to Las Vegas. My mom has cancer.
Where in Montana?
We were in Polson, Montana. He worked for O'Neill Law Firm there. He was a nice guy. I don't think he ever really understood how troubled Stewart was. I think Stewart was able to keep up with that work enough. Cases were pretty, and he's also really brilliant. So if he just does minimal work, it's pretty impressive, as long as he doesn't go off into kooky land, it's okay, and so then we moved back to Las Vegas. I never really understood why, except that he was getting behind. I think his mother offered him some kind of job with some kind of scam she was running that never happened. And then he wound up working for a law firm in Las Vegas. He failed the bar in Nevada. He could not pass the Nevada bar. It was harder than the Montana bar. Was there for about a year, got fired. His work ethic there was atrocious. He was showing up at 10 o'clock in the morning when he was supposed to be there at 8. There was nothing I could do. There was nothing I could do to get him to work on time. I set every clock 2-3 hours off. I would put a CD in the car so that the guy on the radio wouldn't announce the real time. I would do everything to try to get him to work on that. That's all my whole, if you're a person that likes to be on time and you're responsible for a person that's late, it's enough to make you tear your hair out.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The stress of him being late like that drove, this person is abusive, controlling. Life with him was already becoming a hell. But that late thing
just drove you over the edge.
This is torture. And I would do everything, just drop him off, and he would come running back out. He would spotted the clock outside of the law firm in the little atrium entrance of the law firm. He spotted the clock and went back out to the car, and he would just drive around and stop and get something to eat, and then go in at 10 o'clock in the morning. And they fired him. And he was surprised.
Yeah. So is this about the time he cooked up the idea for the Oath Keepers?
Yeah, he'd been fired from everywhere. The next thing he did is he started doing a little bit of legal writing, like ghost writing legal briefs. That really frustrated me because these things were paying like 75 to 100 bucks an hour for writing legal briefs. And, unlike running your own law firm, or, there's no, you have your own law firm, you got to pay for, the LexisNexis stuff, you got to pay for your insurance, there's all this overhead, you got to have a legal secretary. This was basically doing the same thing. He was actually making more money than a lot of lawyers who have their own law firm.
Right.
Just ghostwriting. He didn't have to stress about taking the bar exam. All he had to do was write legal briefs. And, but he didn't get paid till he turned them in. And he just, if he had just worked a few hours a day, but he just wouldn't do it. He just would not. And then at this point, I've got all these kids, and I can't, it's really his outbursts, his violent outbursts, his throwing things, or, just randomly grabbing a kid, doing that upper arm grab thing,
Right.
And every time I left the room, so I couldn't leave the room, so I couldn't work, so I'm really kind of stuck. And I really still didn't have it in my head that I could leave him. So I kept thinking, man, I got to fix it. I was really desperate to fix it. And it felt like I had one last ditch effort when he said he was going to start a nonprofit org. And I just thought, well, maybe this is the thing he needs. He needs a mission. Maybe if he just has a mission. And, initially when Oath Keepers first started out, it was completely reversed. Although I think where it is now, or whatever it is now, was his ultimate goal, actually. I think what he saw was the energy of the Ron Paul movement. He saw the money, he saw the youth, he saw the people willing to donate their hours and their time. And, typical narcissists, they absorb, that's what they do. They absorb energy from people, right? So I think he saw that energy, he saw that, and he wanted to conjure up a way to take it for himself. So when the Ron Paul movement wound down, some Air Force kid had given him the idea of the name. And I thought it was a great name. I thought that was so marketable. I said, if you're going to start some, because and the other part of my head is, this guy's been fired from everywhere. And if he starts this, all he has to do is talk for a living. That's all he has to do is talk. He cannot get fired.
Right.
Maybe he can make a paycheck, and maybe we can like own a house, or at least be able to pay the electric bill, because at that point we were lucky we were living in a home that was already deep into foreclosure and couldn't be rented out to anyone else, because we were months behind in rent. The power and the water was getting shut off every other month. And, we're dipping into food storage to eat.
Yeah.
And, and then just psychologically, he didn't really believe in the regular trappings of life outside of preps and normal life. Like, he would consider it immature, emotionally immature to want to own things like couches and, and things for the kitchen. Like, we could buy those things, but they had to be purchased with like grocery money. Like, I could buy a couch if it was 20 bucks from a neighbor who was throwing it out, right? So the house is depressing. Like, to me, environment's a big deal.
Right.
my son and everything. I like it. It's psychologically, it's important. And we're just living with torn up couches and mismatched dishes. And he's wearing, $200 shoes, and it's already bizarre. Everything's off.
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, well, if his real problem, like he claims, that he doesn't have a mission, and this can be his mission, and all he has to do is talk for a living, maybe we can do this. We'll have t-shirts. Oath Keeper sounds like a motorcycle club. Like, that just sounds cool. I really thought this would be a cool thing. And I started the thing where I thought, here's what I want to do. People will submit their testimony to what their oath to the Constitution means to them, like a blog, right? a time when they defended it. Basically the complete opposite of what we've seen during George Floyd, like a time when a police officer stood up and said, you can't do that, and they almost lost their job. And then they, it worked out in the end, or it didn't, or they got fired. So people would submit those to the blog and they'd get their photo up and they'd, or sometimes they were anonymous. And I just thought that was really neat. I thought it was neat. And the rule was it was going to be apolitical and no memberships. If people wanted to donate, they could. And if Stewart wanted to make money, it would be t-shirt sales. And then by, 4 or 5 months in, that was one of the few times I really put my foot down. I said, this idea of taking memberships is bad. This is bad. Please don't do this. Do not do this. I can't take part in this. And that was, up until then, I had been shipping all the t-shirts. I had been answering almost all the correspondence. I had been editing almost everything he put on this, not everything, but like his 10 orders, that's all. You can tell that's all Stewart. But, I was running all the testimonials to the site. But when I just stepped away. When he said he wanted to take memberships, I just thought that was a really bad idea. Because there's no way you can take memberships and still be open to all these different, and we had people coming out and say, hey, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I believe in this, or, and I believe in that. And, and we have all these viewpoints. Once you take memberships, that's going to close up to the org says this. It's no longer just a free-for-all blog, and he hired 4 people to replace me. A membership person, a t-shirt person, a correspondent, and he started taking a paycheck. And I would say, the Jose Guerrera case, I think that was a good call. It was probably the last good call that Oath Keepers made. That was a kid, I don't know if you're familiar with that, a kid in Tucson, Arizona. He's a veteran. It was a no-knock raid. He was the wrong person.
Right.
Shot him. He was there with his wife and baby. The police shot him like 70 times. And so they went, of course, Stewart flaked on the wife, but he went down there and they made a big deal out of it and they presented her with a flag. And, I don't think he ever helped her pass that. I think he completely flaked out on her, but supporting that family and pointing out the dangers of just, busting down someone's door. You don't even know whose door you're knocking on. You're just tearing down people's doors in the middle of the night. And so I think that was a good call. And I mean, that was the whole point of what Oath Keepers was about. And somewhere in there, he just started drifting further and further right. And I really tried to hold on to it. I really tried to keep him one way or another.
Yeah.
And
well, so they had the launch in Concord, I think it was. Right?
Yeah.
In 2009, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I first twigged to the Oath Keepers' existence mostly because I was monitoring Patriot militia chat channels and their social media because that's what I do. And I came across this guy, Charles Dyer, who was this kid from Oklahoma. He first started out doing these videos anonymously, wearing a skull mask, which was the very first time I ever saw a skull mask. And he would do these rants about how, the tyranny will not be permitted. And there are people within the military who are ready to rise up and fight this tyrannical government and so on and so forth. And then he he came out when he was at a 4th of July event, 2009 in Oklahoma, and said, I'm Charles Dyer. You know me better as July 4th Patriot, but I'm here to talk to you today about this group, the Oath Keepers. And that was really the first I'd paid any. I think possibly the thing at Concord had briefly crossed my radar, but this was at the time the Tea Party was starting, so right-wing folks were doing all kinds of these things, right?
Everywhere,
Rising up against the tyranny of a black president.
Yeah.
And of course the fear that so I then went to the Oath Keepers site, checked out everything they were doing. started watching videos of Stewart at CPAC and things like this. And it was, the first thing that struck me, of course, was, the 10 orders we will not obey were straight out of John Birch Society fever dreams about the tyrannical New World Order trying to take guns away from gun owners, right? And of course, most of us had a pretty good idea that, most likely Obama's never going to do anything like this.
Yeah.
But so it struck me, all of us, as being extremely paranoid.
Yeah.
But the concerning thing for me, of course, was that, what he was spouting was a lot of the rhetoric we had seen from the Patriot movement in the 90s. But he was recruiting people from the military and police departments into this organization and essentially radicalizing them, right? That was my concern, because we'd already seen what we call the Timothy McVeigh effect, which is, most of the time, if you've followed the radical right for a long time, you know that most of these guys are fairly incompetent. And especially a lot of the guys fantasizing about overthrowing the government and all that sort of thing. And so, they're not terribly dangerous because they're mostly buffoons. But the danger is when you get somebody who actually is experienced in weapons and material. And so we could see that this is what Stu was doing, and drawing them in. And the interesting aspect, of course, to it was that Oath Keepers then became this major entity within the Tea Party movement.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And this really propelled his image and propelled the organization. I mean, he must have been making a fair amount of money.
Well, he took a paycheck.
Right.
But the problem is, it was also his org. So a lot of times he would live himself out of the Oath Keeper side. And then a lot of times he'd be like, well, not enough money left to pay myself this week. So the family lives off of the paycheck side, but he would
So you were left high and dry.
And be like, well, there wasn't enough money to pay me this week. So then I would be like, well, maybe Oath Keepers can pay the power bill. No, we can't do that. What am I supposed to do about the power bill?
So do you remember Charlie Dyer? The whole thing?
Oh, yeah. I definitely remember Charles Dyer. Like a lot of Stewart's stunts, he saw Charles Dyer right away. He saw his videos. Stewart is very quickly jealous of people that get attention. He's always jealous of guys who look cool, right? He became pretty obsessed with them almost immediately because he had a lot of YouTube love. A lot of ladies chasing after him. He's got the skull mask and he's tall, right?
Yeah.
And Stewart was immediately jealous and obsessed with him and following him around on YouTube, looking at all his videos. And what he does when he's really jealous of someone is he tries to sort of absorb them into his hive mind, into his the Borg. He tries to absorb them. He became very jealous of him. Started following on YouTube. Almost immediately invited him to our home, having never met him before. At this point, I think I had 5 kids at the house. So now Charles Dyer's on our couch. And then it's after he's staying at the house that I find out, 3-4 days after he's been sleeping on my couch, I find out that he's, possibly being charged with molesting his kid, So now I've got, it's so much stress and just so much, my kids are in this house. And so he didn't stay much longer after that, but it's just really just another one of Stewart's stunts.
Well, the interesting thing was that Stewart immediately
He
said,
was never a
"Oh,
member,
I
right?
barely know the guy," and he was never a member,
Yeah, I basically
and
lived with
all
us
these
that
things.
summer. Stuart used to talk to his mother all the time, Charles Darwin's mother. Um, yeah, he was at our house, and which I was not happy about when I found out there was a problem. And then it sounded like his life was the kind of mess I didn't really need in my life. I got enough going on, and it sounds like there's drug use in his household, with his ex-wife, and this is a thing, and everybody's cheating on each other, and everybody's doing drugs, and like I don't need enough problems in my life. I don't need, trailer park drama on my couch too. And he didn't stay much longer after that. Um, he had a sort of an eerie vibe about him, honestly.
Yeah, no, he's very scary seeming.
Yeah, and just his demeanor
Yeah,
was pretty creepy, really. And so he stayed at our house. Another YouTuber, I can't even remember his name, stayed at our house too. It was about this time that my kids and I were cleaning up the house. About 3 days later, and I had my daughter running a vacuum on one side of the room, and my son is running a carpet cleaner on the other side of the room. And when both machines were very loud in this large room and were rumbling, the ceiling starts ringing out with feedback, like two microphones touching, going, woo. And when you turn both machines off, it still kept going for a minute. And everything, then we learned every time you run loud devices, you could make the ceiling start ringing. So, and it was later on we learned that there was an ATF investigation of Oath Keepers and an FBI investigation of Oath Keepers. It was the FBI one closed down, supposedly with no wrongdoing or whatever. But yeah, that was interesting. And then yeah, and then so he made Charles Dyer the Marine Corps liaison and head of
right.
something else. I can't remember what. And then when Charles Dyer was arrested and convicted, he was never a member. He was never a member. Well, when he was made Marine Corps liaison, Oath Keepers was not yet taking memberships.
Right.
So that's it. That's the technical.
Yeah, I remember.
So
yeah, well, I mean, he did the same thing, and I think it was 2014, 2015, when they went and stood guard outside of military recruitment stations. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
They panic over whether the Obama administration was leaving military recruiters exposed to these terrorists. So the Oath Keepers were going to go turn out at these military recruiting stations. And somebody at one of these watches dropped his weapon, and it misfired, it fired, nearly hit people. I think it hit a window, something like that. Anyway, and it was somebody who was mishandling the gun and had a live round in his goddamn magazine, right? And and so of course, what happened the next day was that Stewart came out and said, well, we checked, and this guy was actually not a member.
Not a member. That was a huge deal behind the scenes. Whenever something would happen in the media, when there's a mass shooting, any kind of crime that looked like it could be, some white dude,
Right.
that was panic time, because they did not have very good record keeping with Oath Keepers, as a lot of people now know since that hack.
Right.
All the IT guys were just, they're not real IT guys. And so there was a panic. He would be on the phone with everyone, check and see if he's a member, check, every combination of his name, nickname, middle name, last name. I mean, everybody would be checking and checking and checking.
Right.
Is this guy a member?
So they mostly rode the sort of Tea Party gravy train until I think 2014 was when they really stepped up the profile by going to the Bundy Ranch thing and playing a major role there. So where were you at this point?
So at this point, 2012, this is like a personal story, but I include this because it really, you can almost track the difference in Oath Keepers, I think, from this event. I had a little girl, and she was stillborn, and it was 2012, and Stewart, after this, I don't know, I caught him in some emails where he was basically trying to use the death of the baby to his advantage.
Right.
And
For
he didn't care.
fundraising.
Yeah, he didn't care. He was in a big hurry to see me up and around and back to, being the wife again. He didn't understand why I was upset. He couldn't understand. This is a full-term baby. She had a name and a birth certificate and a death certificate, and you know, um, I had to have her cremated, and all this is going on. I carried her for 2 weeks after I lost her before I could get labor started, and it was this huge event, and he definitely used it to his advantage. He used it to try to get out of being disbarred for a while. He said he was helping, and he had no interest in me. He seemed confused why I was still upset 2 weeks later. He didn't have any understanding why I wasn't back paying attention to him all the time. And that was the moment when I thought, well, all these years of trying to fix this person, of pouring every ounce of energy I have that didn't go into the kids, went into him, of me ignoring myself, my education, my everything to fix this person. And I realized, well, he's a sociopath.
He can't be fixed.
He cannot be fixed. And that was the moment when I realized it. And I did not know if I could get out, if I could get divorced. I didn't know if that was even an option at that point. And then I kind of became a rag doll for about a year. And there was a house, we were living in town in Kalispell. There was a house way out in the woods owned by someone you knew. So far out. I mean, it was like an hour and a half to get to a grocery store. And it was deep in the, an extra foot of snow. And he really wanted to live there. And before that, I had said, I will never live there. I will never live there. I want to live rural, but I want to live rural so I can be more social, so I can interact with humans and not just have masses, but people I can connect with. I don't want to be completely isolated. But I was just kind of like a rag doll, and he just moved us out there, and I don't even remember moving out there, really. It's just kind of a blur. And I stopped all attempts to what I think of as, Stewart's a grenade, and I'm putting the pin back in him all the time, trying to fix it, trying to keep him on track, trying to pull it. Remember what this thing was like before, no. And there was no doing that. And you can almost just track the crazy that happened with Oath Keepers as soon as I just stopped. And Bundy Ranch was ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous, but at the same time, I didn't want him to be home. So, there's that, we're just so happy to have him gone, and the kids and I can have some breathing space, and, without him hovering over. So by this time he's getting violent. Soon after Bundy Ranch, he almost killed my daughter. She was a teenager, and he just started choking her. And that's when, by then my two oldest kids were just a few years from being adults. And that's when we just got together and said, well, after this incident, this has bought us time. He knows he stepped over the line, and so it probably won't be violence for a little while, and we got to get out. We got to get out of this. And that was like 2014. But before that, before he choked her and that happened, there was one event that caught my attention, like 2013, 14 or so. That was, Oath Keepers said they wanted to do a solidarity march after Ferguson with BLM. And I thought, well, there's something interesting, okay.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of on board. I was okay. Everybody's doing open carry marches. It's all the rage. Why shouldn't you do one with BLM? Stewart, my God, hand out your ARs. Have you? But no, he did not want to do that.
They went and did patrols for the shopkeepers in Ferguson.
Yeah. And and they were minority shop. It was very. I thought that was that event is so strange, because if you look it up, I still have no idea what they did there. Everyone has a different. I mean, they did. Yeah. Yes, there were some true believers. I mean, John Kerriman was on the rooftop. He did put out multiple, devices that people were throwing on the roof, and he put them in buckets of water. And so that did happen. And those business owners, there's a one black lady, two Asian people, and some white dude. You
Yeah.
know, so
Well,
they did want them there. But what else were they doing there? I don't know. They certainly weren't defending the protesters' rights, which is what Stewart sort of implied to me when they went out there.
right.
And the independent, and then I, overheard him talking to different people, and it seemed like he told a different story. Whoever he talked to,
Yeah.
it's very vague what they did there. And I thought, well, if you're really on the side that you say you're on, let's see this solidarity march. And then
Right.
no, he didn't do it. And he had an argument with the guy who wanted to run it. And so I said, well, just do it anyway. Do it. And no. And so that was like the last interesting thing that I thought was kind of bringing Oath Keepers back around to where they started. But now, looking at the whole picture, I realize that Stewart, being the extreme narcissist, grandiose narcissist that he likes to absorb energy and other people's work and energy, and he absorbs it and uses it for himself. So if you look at the beginnings of Oath Keepers, he absorbed that Ron Paul energy and soaked it up into Oath Keepers for his own gain, right? Then later on, Oath Keepers changed again, and it really seemed to match and morph the Tea Party movement. Like, okay, well, I'm going to grab this energy and I'll agree with whatever they say. And, and then Trump, who he called a fascist, earlier, this is ridiculous. This guy, I don't know what. And then there's the Trump train. So he jumps on the Trump train.
Right.
He grabs the train. But I think at that point, like my son has said in a few interviews, he thinks that Stewart at that point, so afraid of still being indicted for Bundy Ranch activities, he's been in fear of that ever since Bundy, and had a real meltdown psychologically after Bundy Ranch, just complete and total meltdown after Bundy Ranch. Just stopped showering.
What about Jared Miller and Jared and Amanda Miller?
Yeah, I
the
think
couple that went on the shooting rampage in Vegas 2 months after there, and of course they were part of the scene. They had, in fact, Jared Miller had been one of the guys who had been spreading the rumors about the supposed attack, a drone attack.
Oh, really? That's who that was? Interesting.
Well, he was one of them, yeah, and of course we know. I mean, that whole situation with the drone attack led to Oath Keepers and militiamen drawing guns on each other there at the Bundy Ranch.
Yeah, and then somebody shot through the wall of the hotel and everything else. Yeah.
And the whole scene broke up pretty shortly after that, because they realized it was all going sideways.
Yeah. And I heard that Stewart gave them money.
No, they gave the Millers money to get the hell out of town because they were causing too much trouble. And so they went to Vegas and set up shop, and then 2 months later killed cops and people in a Walmart. And of course Stewart had nothing to do with that too, right?
I mean,
they were never Oath Keepers, is what
they were never. I suspect Stewart was probably, I mean, this is just conjecture, but Stewart often would target people who were, I've heard that they were like druggy types and they were homeless, and he would target people like that because they were needy. He loved to have people like that around him. He could control people like that very easily. Or maybe he was trying to give her money, as a prostitute or what, that kind of thing. Who knows? But those are the types of people that he would often target to keep around him. It's a whole lot easier to control someone who's a mess, and so he would often try to draw those people around him like disciples,
Right.
So it was probably something like that. I'm sure that he knows those people better than he claims, like Charles Dyer. I'm sure he had way more contact with them than he
ever admitted. And then after that it was all come 2016, he was all the Oath Keepers are all on board the Trump train. And some of Stewart's writings about later, I think 2017 and 18, he was seeing the Oath Keepers as being, a sort of supplemental private army to defend Trump.
Yes, absolutely. and completely flipping from, going on O'Reilly years before saying there's no such thing as a constitutional reason to declare martial law. It's literally against his 10 orders. But
Oh yeah.
absolutely against those. You don't see those posted anywhere anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you don't. Or at least you
Yeah.
didn't after up to January 6th. Yeah, and of course he by then, of course, you severed everything in 2018, I think it
Yeah,
was.
February 2018 was
Yeah.
when we made our big run. But that was a couple that by 2017, I
You weren't
barely
seeing
remember
him.
anything. Yeah, I was so busy just trying to put money away and trying to, secretly meet with a lawyer, and it was just nonstop that whole year of just sneaking out and, you know, just
And you weren't seeing a lot of Stewart by this point anyway, right? He was
he
on
was
the road all the
traveling a
time.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
and by then my son had his own car, which was good because he would, and Stewart constantly try to keep our car in getting repaired. So we would go like 6 months with no car. He would just pile up repairs. I'll fix this. It's a car with 300,000 miles on it. It was ridiculous. But he would tens of thousands of dollars in cars repairs so that we couldn't have a car. He would come to town. He'd have a rental car for a couple of weeks, and you know, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's and he'd spend all this money on us, even though we'd been living on powdered cheese for like 2 weeks, and then he comes home and buys everyone steaks, and it was it's a very,
I'm
very
kind
up and
of
down.
curious about the eye patch. When I was first following Stewart, he had a glass eye, and I wasn't sure what it was. Initially, I thought he might have lazy eye or something.
Yeah, because it doesn't.
But it would show up on videos. But yeah, I think the first time I saw him with the eye patch must have been 2016 or 17. Is that right?
Yep. So actually, even in those those photos I posted where he's kind of in a hole in the ground or whatever, not the escape tunnel.
Yeah, the spider hole.
Yeah. You can actually see side of his face is really puffed up. And so after Bundy Ranch, my son thinks either he did some work with the feds as a deal, possibly, or they threatened him because he did meet with the FBI after Bundy Ranch, or just having his own side criticize him. He's very, very thin-skinned about any kind of criticism. Yeah. Either way, he had a complete meltdown. And that's when the violence at home became, he's like, waving guns around every day, loaded guns with his finger on the trigger at me, almost, maybe not every day, but, like once a week. He's pulling a gun on me. And not necessarily pointing it at me, but waving it around the room and saying it, because he's very aware of laws, right? Like, he'll never say, I'm going to shoot you, but he'll say, I'm going to shoot myself. But in the meantime, he's screaming at you and saying things like, I'm not violent. If I were violent, you'd be by your throat up against the wall while he's holding a gun. That's not suicidal, that's homicidal. So that kind of behavior. And then along with that, he stopped showering, he stopped brushing his teeth, and he stopped, a prosthetic eye, it's like a contact lens, right?
Right.
So, there's a silicone ball that's implanted surgically where the eyeball used to be, and the skin grows over that, right, over time, many years back. And then the prosthetic eye fits like a thick contact lens that you could kind of pop out with a little suction cup or pull out. And so you just have to clean it.
Right.
You have to clean it and you have to take it out. And
he wasn't even doing that.
He wasn't. And then it became infected, and like a year or two went by, I think, where he just did not take his eye out. His prosthetic eye, didn't clean it or take it out. If you ever see pictures of him, like he puts his finger in water and he'll put water in his eyeball, and that's it. That was all he would do, because it would get uncomfortable because it's like stuck and not move and dry out. And his face started swelling, but he also wasn't brushing his teeth, so I just thought it was a tooth. He'd get tooth infections too, really bad ones, and he'd get teeth pulled, or he would spend all this money getting cadaver bone put in and then never put the tooth implant in. It was just silly stuff like that. But I mean, he just didn't shower, he didn't brush his teeth, he didn't clean his eyeball, and then eventually infection caused the eye socket to rupture. And and then it kind of pushed out the silicone implant, and then
Yeah.
he had to have the prosthetic eye. The eye doctor couldn't even remove it. They had to take him to some kind of specialist in prosthetics and carefully remove it because it had tissue growing all around it from and dying tissue. And anyway, if he ever wants to wear a prosthetic eye again, he has to redo the whole surgery. And yeah, that's why he's
That's why he switched to,
that's why we're
well,
so
I thought it was, I mean, I thought it made him look badder, like
yeah.
more of a badass. So I thought that was maybe,
He wanted to embrace
but
that Disney villain.
yeah. No, it was, well, it definitely was an image change for him,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was in April of 2017 that I first saw him like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was,
But I think he had been doing the eye patch for some time before that.
yeah. I can't remember exactly when that happened, but
But
somewhere in there. It was after that Bundy Ranch thing where he just fell apart. I mean, he would just yell and yell and yell at you and just scream and scream and scream. And then he would just fall asleep mid-sentence and then wake up a day and a half later and start screaming exactly like someone who knocked out from anesthesia or something. Like when they count backwards and then 4 hours later they keep counting, he would pick up mid-sentence where he left off a day and a half earlier and not know a day and a half had gone by. It was just really weird, really just gone, completely gone. I mean, I feel like we'd be dead by now if we hadn't got out when we did, just because the violence was just going straight up, just straight up. I don't know where he is now mentally because I've just not really had contact with him, but
yeah,
it was bad.
yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I wasn't surprised that they had a leading role in the January 6th stuff because
Yeah, I wasn't either.
I had been reading what he was saying in the 6 months up to that. When the protester in Portland was shot, Stewart went completely apeshit and called for civil war, demanded that Trump, invoke the Insurrection Act or invoke martial law in order to deal with Antifa, right? And boy, and everything that he was writing after that just kept spiraling up and up and up. And after Trump lost the election, then he, was very clearly engaging, talking about, seditionist behavior.
Yeah, and I know that Stewart knows that Trump lost the election, but he knows that that's his legal cover. He's known that from the beginning. We thought this was legal because we thought this was our, that's going to be his attempt.
Right.
And good luck with the DC jury with that, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think they let the Nazi concentration camp generals get off because they truly believed that the Jews were a threat to humanity.
Yeah.
And I don't
so I think it's not going to work for him. Maybe it would, other some of these cases, the past cases, I can't remember where they were tried as seditious conspiracy were tried in states where the jury pool was a little different. So I think that's one factor in this case.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in a lot of trouble.
That was part of the concern, was that this judge in Texas who was holding the hearing on his detention was going, well, maybe he could go stay with his cousin, right? Did you know this cousin?
I've met, it's actually, I know the cousin is actually that person's wife who spoke, who was on the stand. I know them to be, nice people. My first thought was, well, they're very naive. They don't know Stewart very well. And I know the narrative that he's told his family. His family believes that I was angry at Stewart all those years ago for cheating on me with a friend, which someone like Stewart, I mean, he's probably cheated on me 100 times, and I probably caught him about 20. For the first 10 years, you care, but nobody cares after that. Um, I don't care about. I care about him choking my kid. I don't.
Yeah.
So they think that I'm angry over that, and that I made up all this stuff about the violence.
And
That's
the
all
kids
just made
too.
up.
Kids
Yes,
made
on
it.
the kids. I've
Yeah.
alienated the children so that even
Yes.
even the adults now.
You brainwashed them.
I brainwashed them, and not only that, well, I have brainwashed Stewart so much. I've gaslit Stewart so much that he actually admitted to choking his daughter in an email, and that was gaslighting. I did all of this. It started him on.
That was
It
what they said
started-
about Charles Dyer too. They
Yeah.
tried to
Right.
claim that his daughter had been brainwashed
Yeah.
into
Mhm.
testifying against him. Anyway,
But my kid's 25, so it's a little bit.
yeah.
And that this put him on a bad road where he made some mistakes, but he's very misunderstood. And then I got up and apparently lied again about him being violent, and now he's in jail. This is all my fault.
Yeah.
It's clearly all my fault. And so they want to help him. His family wants to help him. He doesn't have a lot of family left. I mean, this is like a second cousin. He's reaching. And this is his mother's half brother's daughter, his husband, who was on the stand. But they basically said on the stand that they're apolitical and they're not involved in oath keepers. But then those sedition hunters online, they're pretty quick. And after the hearing, they found screenshots of the cousin, broadcasting live for Oath Keepers in 2020, and just tons of Oath Keeper promotion stuff. So I don't know if that got made into the court or not. I do know they tried to submit it. So the judge didn't mention that, but that might have been a factor too.
But apparently, you had a private conversation, or you had a phone conversation with the judge, correct?
Mm-hmm. And both lawyers.
And both lawyers, right? And
his lawyer
basically filled her in on how he was building escape tunnels. Was this in Eureka also, or?
This is in Trigo, Montana.
Trigo.
But the escape tunnels. The attorney came out and said those photos aren't escape tunnels. No, they're not. Those are photos some journalist took off my blog and posted them everywhere with a fake headline. Those are pictures of just a training, him in the holding. This is, nothing to do with the tunnels. I never presented those photos as having anything to do with the tunnels.
Right.
They're funny. They're funny photos, but they're irrelevant except that they show him with a propensity to be in a hole in the ground. But and to do that kind of training, I think someone who does that is probably more likely to dig an escape tunnel than someone who doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, our whole lives were that stuff. I mean, my kids, I told the Dallas journalist, I was like, I know this attorney, it's his job to be the attorney. And, with a big case like this, there are some things Stewart's going to wiggle out of. All these charges, there's a lot of this stuff that Stewart's going to wiggle out. But the escape tunnels are not one of them. Because half the town knew about these stupid tunnels. Everybody knew about the escape tunnels. This is not just some kind of thing. You can't say the jealous the ex-wife is upset about this, so she meant no. Everybody, the landlord knew about the escape tunnels. But it was just one factor. The escape tunnels were to lead to, they never got finished. They eventually collapsed. Right. But they did go from the house out to the cover of trees, and out past the cover of trees was National Forest. Out in National Forest was a logging road. That's where the car was supposed to go that was unregistered, or was registered to like 3 people back since it's been purchased. Right. Yes, and now here we have permanent registration, so it's just the old plates are still on it. Then eventually they collapsed. Then we moved to another house in Trigo, Montana, down the road, 6 miles down the road. Then he came up with a different plan, although I do believe he probably did those training classes to further look at ways to build the tunnels better, with some supports inside of them. That might be part of why he did that.
Right.
And then, but the new plan was more about booby trapping the front of the property, because it was just a different property. It wasn't as far out into the woods. And so this property led to a hill that led to National Forest. We always had to live back up next to National Forest that led into Idaho. This had a small mountain behind it. that when you went up the mountain down a Jeep trail, led down the mountain to a property that was owned by another militia, unrelated to Oath Keepers, who he had to deal with, that he could get to their yard from the Jeep. So that this property, he had a second unregistered car, which was a Jeep. And that was to go down the Jeep trail to the militia property 5 miles away through their property, and then their property led up to the same back road to Idaho. So that was the new
Gotcha.
plan. That was a little bit different, but yeah. So that was it.
He
That was our whole
always
lives, was escape.
being prepared for having the feds descend upon you.
Yeah.
He basically, it was almost like he was seeing himself as Randy Weaver, or
Who we hated, but yeah.
yeah, well, everybody hates Randy.
But he would use that, constant fear, Randy Weaver. First thing they do is shoot the sun. First thing they do is, shoot the mom holding the baby. First thing they do is kill all the dogs. And he would terrify the kids with these stories.
Right.
Constantly, we would always have all these dogs. And he would always make sure each kid had their own giant, scary looking dog. And then he would tell each kid, well, first thing the cops would do if they showed up, if you ever called the cops, first thing they would do is shoot your dog. And that was constant. We lived in fear, even though we would have our own little get-togethers where it'd be like, this is not, Dad's got,
so he's
got issues.
Controlling with paranoia. Yeah. This is all classic authoritarian personality stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
Including, I should add, the controlling in his personal relationship, controlling and abuse. That's all. Yeah, he does have a classic authoritarian personality, but yes, on top of it, he's there's all the narcissism and essentially sociopathy.
He's interesting because he's also strangely lazy, and that was one of the few things that kind of we had going for us as a family that helped us get out. Really, is that we always were like, what if he put cameras around and saw us, trying to make, try to get out of here, but he was just so lazy. Most of his plans were never finished. I mean, the reason he never booby trapped the front of the yard with the razor wire is my son and I kept hiding it. Right. And they were heavy. Oh, they were heavy. These giant rolls of razor wire.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's Montana, you still have people out walking their dogs. Yeah. You still have neighbors who are going.
Animals. We had little kids.
Yeah,
we had the neighbors over all
deer
the time.
Coming through, right?
Yeah. My daughter was dating one of the neighbors. She was back and forth. They were back and forth. I mean, when Stewart was gone, we had people over. I mean, we were back and forth. My kids were.
Yeah. You didn't need booby traps out there for the neighbors.
I had all these little kids, and he wanted to put razor wire out. Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, so we just kept. As the best way to do it is just the easiest tool with him is to just work within his laziness. So if it just kept hiding and go, well, isn't it out there in the shed? He would run out of energy pretty quick. He'd just buy more, and then we just hide it again.
So and I gather that life has been pretty good with no Stu around. Huh?
Yeah, it's been really nice. That was since he's been arrested, I mean, my oldest daughter especially, she's 22 years old, and she looks like a different person these last few years. And both of my oldest girls were saying, my son doesn't care. He doesn't care if he runs into Stewart. But my daughters, man, they said they feel like they used to feel like they would see him everywhere, all the time. I thought I saw Stewart dead. And they would have anxiety attacks, and they would have dreams that they would try to go to a grocery store and they'd run into him, or he'd find them. And, I can't believe what a difference it's made. And my oldest daughter, she's 22, and she really, she built herself a little debris hut in the woods when she was about 16, because she got tired of being woken up in the night for emergencies that he would create. And she didn't want to live. And she said, you know what? I'm never going to spend another night in that house when he's in it. And she built herself a little hut in the woods, and she slept out there when it was -15. She made a fire. She would heat rocks in the fireplace and put them in a little pit inside of her hut and sleep on heated rocks. And she would not sleep in the house. She just would not ever sleep in there again. And the number of times she was, oh, there's an emergency, the power's out, the phone's out, or I hear something, everybody get out of bed, or just scream at them for no reason, or come up with random nonsense.
Right.
He would make rules like the tax code, thousands and thousands of rules everyone would have to obey that all conflicted with each other. You couldn't possibly obey all these rules. And then at random, just, 4 o'clock in the morning, because he would stay up for days on end and then sleep for days on end. It's just weird, disordered sleep, like you can't believe. And just for no reason, he just had a rule that nobody could have cotton socks, and just started screaming in the middle of the night because he discovered cotton socks in the house. It's just bizarre,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you, of course, you've gotten people saying, oh, well, how could you not have known that he was, this kind of far right wacko? Didn't you help support him when he was a far right wacko, and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
And of course, people don't really understand how ordinary people can get drawn into these people's worlds and the controlling ability that they have. But it sounds to me as though you were never really pulled into necessarily the conspiracy theories and all that stuff anyway, were you? Or
not really. I mean, I've always been a libertarian. I'm still pro-gun. I hunt. I get a deer every year to feed the kids with my 1970s Sears and Roebuck rifle. And then I unload it and I put it in the closet and I don't look at it again and I don't think about it. And I don't, I don't have 30 of them or 40 of them. and I don't, it's not a lifestyle. It's just something I do to feed my kid,
Right.
But it's just I don't know. I never agreed with his craziness. I thought the 10 orders were ridiculous as soon as he wrote them. I thought they were embarrassing, frankly, is what I thought. This is embarrassing, and I was kind of surprised by how well they were received. Like people, because, and then I thought, well, maybe they're harmless because none of this is going to happen.
Exactly.
And so I really kind of held him to for a while, like, so this is going to be a First Amendment organization. You're going to push the First Amendment to the absolute limits, but that's it. You cannot, I said, just realistically, I don't care what you say is legal and not legal. You can't push the First Amendment to the absolute, edge and push the Second Amendment to the absolute. You can do one or the other, but you can't do both.
Right.
It's just stupid. You're not going to get away with that forever. And so he did promise no training, no playing army, no militia stuff. And initially he stuck to that for a very short time because a lot of other people in Oath Keepers backed me up on that and said, you're right, you cannot do this. And so he had a rule, if you're going to join, first he had a rule, no militia, you can't be a member of militia if you're a member of Oath Keepers. And then he changed it to, well, you can't show up in Oath Keeper gear. You can't represent Oath Keepers while you're playing. And then that just all went to hell. And
all that disappeared.
And it was just
pretty soon the guys out doing paramilitary training had okay patches all over. And we were seeing that definitely out in the field. So I remember initially he separated himself and it's true. There never really has been an Oath Keepers militia. What he has always done, though, is encouraged members to form their own local militias, correct? Yeah. So, but he obviously was in contact with a lot of these, including Kelly Meggs and, and the folks who led that stack up the Capitol steps. So what were you thinking that morning, January 6th, when you were watching it?
I didn't really realize how deep Oath Keepers were in to this. I
Yeah.
knew he'd be there. I knew he'd make a show of it. I knew I figured he'd probably stay on the outside edges like he did at Berkeley. Everybody's
Like he
fighting.
always
He's
does.
at the stage, right? He's in the safe zone. Oh, we're doing
Yeah.
security for VIP, whatever safe. Because he's very, it's strange to think, but he's really risk adverse, very much so. He just, his baseline is very different from most people, so it's a little different looking, but he is risk adverse. And so I thought he'd kind of be on the outside edge. But when I saw that stack, as soon as I saw that stack, that's Stewart. That is definitely Stewart. There's Stewart all over it. Proud Boys didn't do that. That's not some militia. That's not some butt crack militia. That's Oath Keepers. That's Oath Keepers doing Oath Keeper stuff. And then the next question was, how involved was he? Did they do this without him knowing?
They were off mission. That was what Stu said.
And at first I thought that could be true. Technically, that could be his, his out. That might have been, he might have never ever said go into the Capitol, but he might have, tried to encourage it without saying it for
wink, wink, nudge, nudge type thing. Yeah.
To keep himself out of trouble. But I think after looking at everything, I think, oh, okay. Nope, he did this. This is him. This is him.
Yeah.
They were doing what he told them to do. And now why? Now he's very risk adverse. So then the next question is, why did someone so risk adverse do something so obviously risky? And who told him it was going to be okay if they did this and that they would all be pardoned?
Yeah.
That's not like Stewart to do it otherwise.
Right. And we've never established any kind of known contact between Stewart and Trump that I know of.
And not directly. I don't think they will, but
I know he was providing security to a lot of Trump events.
Yeah, and I think there probably is a connection, but whether they'll be able to make it, because I think Stewart and Trump's people would probably keep them apart.
Yeah.
Several people away, so everybody could deny. Well, I just talked to this guy, and I just talked to that. So it may be impossible to make the connection. I'm almost positive there is one. I don't think he would have done that without the go ahead, because his rhetoric changed overnight and immediately became as though he was trying to push everything to a certain tipping point,
Right.
and then he kind of pulled back, like, oh, Trump's not going to do it. And then it's almost like he got a message again, like, well, if you could really do it, if you can get enough, maybe we can still declare Insurrection Act. And and then there was that final push that I think he was in contact with someone. I think it might be really hard to prove it.
Yeah, I mean, it's more likely somebody like Meadows, somebody who was in Trump's direct sphere and was actually overseeing what was going on, and was sympathetic with the whole Insurrection Act idea. But we don't know. Well, we'll find out, I expect, as the investigation continues. They've found some pretty, I mean, I found the indictment fascinating reading. So
yeah, I was getting worried they weren't gonna charge Stewart at all. I was starting to lose. I knew it would take a while.
I had messaged you 2 weeks before telling you I thought they were going to.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I thought, well, maybe. I had a feeling. I had a feeling it would come before he. I don't know. I had almost like a premonition that he would get arrested for something when he was 56 years old. And he turns 57 in April. So I thought it might be coming. I just had this gut feeling for a while that he would get arrested before his birthday, but yeah, I'm glad they finally put enough pieces together to be able to do that. Well, it's a relief. I mean, just from a personal standpoint.
Tasha, are you getting any threats or pushback from Patriot folks?
No, I have not. I mean, I think they know, I'm talking with the FBI, and I think I had like one harassing message, or 2 or 3 from the same guy, and then a couple, a couple things on my GoFundMe, a couple messages, just
right,
racial slurs that I don't even know what to make makeup.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, yeah, nothing concrete. And I don't know, maybe Stuart's just out of friends. I'm more worried. My biggest fear is Stewart, and maybe it's some of his family who thinks I've wronged a great
Yeah.
man. We're really emotional about this, and they think it's all my fault. That's a concern I have. But for the most
Yeah.
part,
Yeah. You made Stu do that stuff and
yeah,
Jeff.
I did. It's all my
Yeah.
fault. LA Times said so too. That was one thing about that article. I thought
What was
they
that?
were the LA Times article. I thought that was a little unfair. They were so worried about liability. They wouldn't let me say that I thought he was a sociopath. They didn't want to cover the abuse, so they want to cover me being, sympathetic to him. But I'm also, trying to, make him happy. So he just leave
Yeah.
me alone, So, in that mindset, it's so hard to explain to people who have not lived like that.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you just leave, and he would constantly, he would never say, I'm going to lock you up in a mental institution, but he would give parables and
Client.
stories about, he's an attorney and people listen to him. And,
He's
a lot of
Yale Law
women,
School graduate. Yeah.
yeah, he's important and he has a lot of friends. And, there's a lot of stories about women that get locked up in mental institutions for being hysterical and claiming terrible things are happening when nothing's happening at all. And you give all these stories, and there's nothing you can do once you get locked up in there, and they lose your children like that.
Yeah.
You give these stories all the time, and it's really hard to explain that to people that are just like, well, why don't you just leave? Why do you need money to get a divorce? Just divorce yourself. And have you ever tried to divorce
Boy,
a
that's
Yale graduate?
well,
It's
not
not
yeah.
about money, it's about the kids. I mean, right now he has, he's in a jail cell, but until
Not
he has
not
50%
only,
custody.
but yeah, not only that, this is a man who's nationally famous, who has a lot of friends, a lot of influence, has a lot of connections within law enforcement.
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
did. The police told me to go home. The police
yeah,
told me to go back to my husband. And they denied my restraining order.
right, right.
He's a good
So,
man.
so yeah, anybody who thinks that was an easy situation to get out of
Yeah.
has
But people just
never
don't
been in it.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course I've never been in it, but I've covered plenty of them.
You've seen it, yeah.
I've seen it all the time. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the reason I started writing about the Patriot movement in the 90s and covering it continually is that my experience has been that right-wing extremism, wherever it goes and wherever it implants itself, leaves a trail of human wreckage. I mean, that's why I knew when I started freelancing that it was going to be a subject that was going to provide me an endless supply of stories, because they wreck people's lives, including the innocent people. Like I was mentioning, the lady in Idaho who's losing her infant to COVID. And and if you, I don't know, I'm sorry, I think you have to have compassion for that, because these are just ordinary people who don't know any better. And the problem is that we have this ecosystem of conspiracy theorists and disinformation artists, con artists, who have managed to build, this huge multi-billion-dollar industry out of purveying false information.
And these algorithms eat it up.
Yeah. Oh, and they make it worse. Yeah. They generate more of it.
I mean, I still, I live in this town, so I talk to people who are right wing all the time, and I mean, they feel sorry for people who took the vaccine. Like, they have empathy because they think they don't know. They'll say things like, "Well, I just feel bad because people take that shot. They think they're doing the right thing, but they don't know." And they feel
they're going to die. Yeah,
they don't know.
Yeah, there's somebody mentioned.
I
think, who was it the other day, mentioned that there's secretly a kill switch in the vaccine, right? And that's what they really believe. Yeah, I went to the Red Pill Festival in St. Regis this summer, and listened to all these guys passing along conspiracy theories. And Ben Garrison was there, by the way, the cartoonist who who lives in Montana, draws all those right-wing cartoons.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, they had a whole bunch of conspiracy folks there, and it was just the same thing. And I have a lot less sympathy for the people up there on the stage, but I worry about the somewhat, I wouldn't say simple-minded, but people have a very simple approach to life. And the whole appeal of the patriot movement is that they wrap themselves in red, white, and blue, talk about the Constitution, and make everybody believe that they're being good, patriotic Americans, right? And there's probably a point where you felt like you were doing that even. So certainly that was how Stewart presented himself.
Yeah.
And we're just good, patriotic Americans, and that's their excuse for January 6th too.
Yeah.
I
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are true believers. I mean, I know there's people like Stewart. I know Stewart knows Trump did not win that election. I know he's just using people. And I don't think he believes in anything, really. Just himself is important.
Power acquisition.
Power, yeah. I don't think he believes in any of my stupid.
Yeah, don't worry. Mine's funky today too. So
I guess I have to wrap up.
I do too. I really appreciate you spending the time with me, Tasha.
Oh, thank you.
And I will send you a link when we get this up.